In the not-so-distant past, the world was a complete nightmare where mountains of corpses piled high and literal rivers of blood flowed. This absolute bloodbath of a war was known as the Great War of Justice and Demons. But everything changed when the ultimate cheat code warrior, the fighting immortal, finally clapped the heavenly demon and brought the conflict to an end. Naturally, a legend like him left behind a martial art with a supposedly terrifying name, which the local dojo master, Jin-mu, proudly revealed to his class of little kids as the Bright Eye Fist. The kids were not impressed at all, instantly trash-talking the name and complaining that it sounded incredibly weak. The master tried to save face by jokingly asking if they preferred the Rooster Fist instead, making the kids burst out laughing since the old man literally changed the name of his technique every single time. Two of the adorable disciples asked if their master actually learned that legendary high-tier technique. The master puffed his chest and claimed that if they kept training hard, they would master it too. Standing in the back with his arms crossed, his son, young Jin-gwon, muttered that his dad was a total liar and probably did not even know the real name of the style. The master completely ignored the shade, hyping up the kids and clenching his fist to declare that once they mastered the Bright Eye Fist, they would become absolutely invincible. Young Jin-gwon yelled that his father was always bluffing, asking why an invincible master was running a tiny dojo in the middle of nowhere and only teaching a bunch of little kids. The dojo was literally perched on top of a lonely cliff in the middle of a massive mountain range. The master burst into a boisterous laugh, claiming it made perfect sense because his fists were invincible, his young disciples were cute, and he had a good-hearted son even if the kid grumbled constantly. Jin-gwon got highly annoyed, yelling about why his dad only lowered his voice when talking about his own son. But this wholesome family comedy did not last long, because tragedy struck immediately. Crying in sheer terror, the young boy peered through a crack in the door and watched his supposedly invincible father collapse helplessly. His dad coughed up a massive puddle of blood as multiple swords ran straight through his chest. Standing impaled, Jin-mu grimly remarked that his attackers used life-extinguishing grass, a poison so deadly it could kill with the smallest dose. He sneered at the shadows waiting at the door, mocking them for going to such extreme lengths to get it. Standing in the doorway were none other than his own senior disciples, the treacherous betrayers Jinnam, Jokyeon, Yukhwan, and Wangpai. Coughing up more blood, the master roared at them, asking if they coveted his power so badly that they would make their deceased master roll in his grave. The first senior disciple, Jinnam, got incredibly triggered, telling his master to shut his mouth and stop mentioning the fighting immortal in his presence. The bloodied master just grinned, mockingly stating that no matter what those frauds did, they would never obtain the ultimate power, because he already passed it down. This revelation sent Jinnam into a total rage, calling his master a crazy bastard. Knowing his time was up, Jin-mu glanced back at his crying son, who was sobbing in his hiding spot. The master internally apologized for showing such a pathetic sight at the end, but he decided to give one final, jaw-dropping flex. He declared that every breath, every movement, and every fiber of his being from that moment on would be his son's ultimate lesson. He clenched his glowing fist, leaped straight into the air despite the swords in his back, and unleashed a blinding, high-tier attack. The senior disciples panicked and screamed for everyone to jump him, with Jinnam desperately yelling for him to hand over that absolute power. But it was too late, as a spectral fist of colossal proportions erupted across the horizon, lighting up the sky and carving a massive, perfect crater into the mountain range. When the dust finally settled, young Jin-gwon ran into the smoking crater, crying out for his father. He found his dad kneeling on the shattered ground, barely holding on to life. The master smiled weakly, admitting that his son might have been right about his invincibility being a total bluff. The weeping boy hugged him, begging him to stop talking. The old warrior just smiled, asking his son if he saw that final punch, proudly stating that his fist was indeed invincible. He pulled out an old, dusty manual from his robe and revealed that the true name of his style was the Limitless Fist Secrets, the ultimate martial art that united every fist in the world. He handed the book over, explaining that its power awakened differently for everyone and that his son had to find and name his own style. With a proud smile, the father placed his hand on the boy's head, telling him to find his own path before crumbling away into dust, leaving behind only his weapons and the heavy legacy of his fist. Clutching the glowing manual, the young protagonist sobbed in the ruins. Meanwhile, the traitorous senior disciples gathered on a nearby cliff, bruised, bloody, and coughing up fluids. One of them groaned that they would have died if the second senior disciple did not save them with high-tier Lightfoot techniques, completely shocked that just a graze from that final punch did so much damage. Jinam narrowed his eyes and ordered his group to track down Jinmu's disciples and his son to kill them all, coldly stating that when you cut down a tree, you must pull out the roots. Fleeing deep into the wilderness, the young survivor clutched his manual and turned his back on society, training his straight punch like an absolute madman for 10 long years. Finally, at the young age of 20, the warrior caught a glimpse of his own ultimate fist. Standing over a bottomless vertical abyss, he blasted straight through the mountain. The long-haired beast bandaged his hands and declared that the time for revenge arrived. Walking out of the misty mountains to hunt down the traitors, the 20-year-old martial artist took a deep breath, but his epic homecoming immediately turned into a massive joke. He stared in absolute disbelief at a group of modern adventurers walking past him. An armored knight asked his wizard companion how her guild interview went, to which she sighed that they were only hiring B-rank hunters and up, while a purple-haired girl teased her to just join their guild. Our hero stood there completely dumbfounded, wondering what on earth he was looking at. He stared at his own ragged, dirty clothes, questioning if the scandalous, tight-fitting modern outfits the girls wore were actually the new fashion trend. He low-key got a massive nosebleed from the view, smiling awkwardly and wondering if the world simply improved while he was gone. Shaking his head, he tried to locate his old hometown, but he looked up to find a massive, futuristic sci-fi city towering where his rural training village used to be. Sweating profusely, the cultivator realized that instead of the mountains changing, the entire world got a massive system update. Desperate for answers, he stopped an elderly merchant carrying a massive cargo box, asking what happened to the village. The elder scoffed, asking if the young man lived under a rock his entire life, and yelled about the famous gate conflict. When our boy looked utterly clueless, the merchant broke down the lore, explaining that 10 years ago, a massive portal opened in the sky, spewing dark energy that corrupted plants and animals into mutated beasts. Suddenly, mysterious beings called hunters appeared from another world and began an indiscriminate slaughter. By their crazy standards, even a basic C-rank hunter easily wiped out top-tier martial artists, resulting in 80% of the Murim warriors getting absolutely clapped. Just when humanity was about to lose everything, the 4 former senior disciples of the Fighting Immortal, now known as the 4 Heavenly Kings, stepped up to save the day. They drove the hunters back, and as more people awakened system skills, a peace treaty was signed, ending the war. The elder excitedly declared that they were now in the convenient era of skills and modern hunter guilds, meaning the era of the new Murim officially began. The merchant then gave the ragged warrior a highly suspicious look, asking if he seriously just came down from the mountains. Jin-gwon stood in stunned silence, his mind completely blown by the fact that the treacherous snakes who murdered his father were now worshipped as humanity's greatest heroes. The elder sighed, telling him to read a newspaper once in a while before walking away. While he was drowning in his thoughts, a beautiful blue-haired girl bumped straight into him. She quickly apologized with a sweet smile, but Jin-gwon was too busy staring at her insanely revealing modern outfit to care. As she skipped away, the apprentice shook off the distraction, deciding to find an inn to gather more information. But when he reached into his robe for his saved iron coins, he realized his pockets were completely empty. To make matters infinitely worse, his father's precious secret manual was gone too, leaving him screaming in absolute horror. Down a nearby alleyway, the blue-haired thief, a D-rank hunter named Alice, giggled as she examined the stolen goods. She expected a rare family heirloom, but she immediately gagged at the smell of the dirty old book, wondering if there was literal garbage smeared on it. Suddenly, a menacing voice cut through the air, telling her she was being extremely rude about someone else's property. Alice shrieked in terror as Jin-gwon loomed over her from the rooftop, declaring that the book was more precious to him than his own life. The thief was utterly dumbstruck, asking how a ragged beggar tracked her down so fast. The cultivator calmly dropped down, stating he simply followed her energy signature, which sent Alice into a panic. Terrified by his presence, Alice stuttered, asking if he was some kind of dangerous dark mage. The warrior just tilted his head, having absolutely no clue what a dark mage even was, and demanded his items back. She desperately thought of the old proverb that those who are penny-wise and pound-foolish will lose what is great when coveting small things. Jin-gwon warned her that seeing is wanting, but even so, one must not steal from others. Knowing she was dealing with someone way above her rank who could read mana effortlessly, Alice immediately switched to maximum clout mode, dropping to her knees and tearfully begging for forgiveness. She returned the manual, but shamelessly begged him for gold. When Jin-gwon asked what gold was, she almost lost her mind, asking if he did not know what basic money was. He offered a few of his old iron coins, and Alice greedily snatched them up, immediately launching into a highly dramatic sob story. She fake cried on the floor, claiming her parents were dead and her sister was dying of a terrible plague. She sobbed that a sketchy local healer had the cure, but his prices skyrocketed, and now he was demanding people pay with their actual bodies if they ran out of gold. Alice covered her face, secretly laughing at how easily her honey trap worked on this naive country bumpkin. The protagonist bluntly asked if it would not have been better to just pay with normal labor, but Alice quickly claimed she was way too pretty to risk that. Satisfied with her story, the martial artist flashed a massive, confident grin and agreed to help, realizing this was the perfect chance to test his newly awakened power. He heroically declared that he would resolve her crisis, quoting that crisis was merely opportunity in disguise. Alice sweat dropped, realizing her plan to just scam him for cash backfired horribly, as the crazy warrior demanded she lead him to the healer immediately. They soon arrived at a massive, ominous palace, where the long-haired fighter noted a complete lack of medicine smell and a heavy, sinister energy. Pushing the heavy doors open, they were greeted not by doctors, but by a terrifying squad of massive black market thugs flexing their muscles. The protagonist sweat dropped, claiming he must have walked into the wrong building since they did not have the faces of healers, and politely tried to leave. But before he could step outside, Alice delivered a brutal, high-impact dropkick straight to the back of his head, sending him face-planting onto the wooden floor. Standing over him with a villainous grin, the deceitful thief laughed that he brought this on himself, by not just giving her the gold, revealing that they were inside the infamous Manhwa Guild, a black market syndicate crawling with powerful C-rank hunters. She shamelessly begged the guild thugs to give her a good price for selling him into slavery. The massive, masked thugs inspected Jin-gwon's solid build, laughing that clients with very specific tastes would buy him instantly, and that a familyless beggar was the perfect target for slave traders. Standing over the fallen rookie, the giant thug prepared to claim his prize. But suddenly, a low, menacing chuckle echoed through the room. Jin-gwon slowly stood up, a terrifyingly cool smile spreading across his face. He trash-talked the entire room, mockingly stating that while he was worried about how much the world changed, knowing that worthless trash like them remained exactly the same was an absolute relief. Furious, the massive thug raised his spiked club to smash him, screaming at him to learn his place. The vengeful son just clenched his right hand, basking in his glowing energy as he realized he could finally test his legendary, invincible straight punch without a single shred of guilt. The vengeful son stood tall and confidently declared that since he was facing a bunch of total trash, he could test his newly awakened punch without a single shred of guilt. The giant masked guild leader swung his spiked club down with all his might, but right as his weapon was about to hit, the thug felt a monstrous pressure and gasped in sheer confusion. Suddenly, a colossal energy explosion blasted right through the entire Manhwa Guild building, shattering the roof, tiles, and walls into a million pieces. Alice got blown backward by the shockwave, staring in absolute disbelief at the rising smoke. As the dust slowly settled inside the ruined building, the remaining thugs stumbled through the rubble, coughing and frantically asking what on earth just happened. When the smoke fully cleared, all the thugs stood there completely unharmed, but they looked down to find Jin-gwon lying face down on the floor, seemingly knocked out cold. Before anyone could process this, a long-haired thug pointed a finger at his boss and screamed that he finally figured it out. He hyped up the boss, yelling that it was the guild leader's legendary skill, and claimed that the attack was so fast and powerful that all he saw was the boss raising his club. The giant masked guild leader stood there holding his club, sweating profusely under his mask, and wondering if he actually swung his weapon without even realizing it. The rest of the thugs instantly joined the hype train, cheering that their boss trained so hard his body reacted on instinct, completely buying into the fake clout. The guild leader burst into a boisterous laugh, flexing and telling his men that he guessed he should not use his skills so recklessly since the buildings would not survive. Lying face down on the floor, the master of straight punches low-key sweat dropped, muttering that adjusting his power was way trickier than he expected. Peering with one eye, the fake unconscious protagonist remembered what happened just a split second before his punch landed. He recalled seeing two random little kids playing with a soccer ball on the street outside the building, realizing that if he actually unleashed his full mountain-shattering punch, the entire city block would have been vaporized. Remembering his father's wise words that once a punch is thrown it can never be taken back, the warrior realized his only option was to redirect the massive energy. He manually bent his fist mid-swing, blasting the colossal energy beam straight up into the sky to destroy the ceiling instead of the thugs. Grinning to himself on the floor, the cultivator found the experience highly interesting, muttering that being strong was not everything after all. The thugs picked up his body, completely convinced he lost his mind from seeing their boss's epic skill, and the guild leader ordered them to treat his minor injuries so they could sell him at the slave market the very next day. As the night fell, our hero was locked inside a dark jail cell under the crescent moon, sitting peacefully while the other captured slaves snored loudly around him. The captive realized that if he kept swinging with his full power, innocent people would constantly get hurt, meaning he desperately needed to learn how to restrain the immense power of his fist. Suddenly, a soft tap echoed on the prison bars, and the martial artist looked up to find a familiar shadow. He casually suggested that since they had not introduced themselves properly, he would go first, announcing his name as Jin-gwon. The blue-haired thief stepped into the light and whispered her name as Alice, prompting the young warrior to smile and remark that Alice was a pretty strange name. The protagonist was soon happily munching on a rice ball Alice sneaked to him, chewing loudly and complaining that a single rice ball was a bit cheap for selling him out. He muttered that she could have at least brought him some boiled meat, sighing that her generosity was just as tiny as her weird name. Alice facepalmed in absolute frustration, asking if this was really the time to complain about dinner, and if he even understood his dire situation. She pointed a finger at him through the bars, screaming if he was not even angry that she literally tricked him. The calm apprentice just chewed his food and blankly asked if her sister's situation was finally settled, which made Alice flinch in stunned silence. She looked down guiltily, gripping her sleeves as she admitted that she really needed the money for her sick sister, but she stubbornly turned away to claim she would not feel sorry for him at all. Alice yelled that in this harsh world, everyone knew the one who got tricked was the real fool. She remembered her own painful past of being robbed as a defenseless child, but as she stood trembling with guilt, she yelled that this was just how the world worked. Jin-gwon looked at her gently, noting that although he thought everything in the world had changed, some things apparently stayed exactly the same. Alice gasped in surprise, and our guy smiled, pointing out that either way, his sacrifice was going to help cure her sister. Alice was completely baffled, and the rookie warmly smiled, telling her that was more than enough and she did not need to feel sorry since he was the one who offered to help first. He told her to just focus on making sure her sister got cured, adding that there was nothing more regretful in life than failing to protect your family. Alice's face turned bright red as she blushed furiously, turning away to hide her embarrassment while screaming that he was a stupid beggar and asking who was worrying about who. The long-haired beast chuckled, teasing her that her reaction was a bit harsh for someone who was literally saving her family. He then smirked, asking her for one small favor if she felt so bad about it. He told her to just keep the precious manual he brought, promising he would come back to retrieve it soon. Alice blushed deeply, hugging herself as she reluctantly agreed to keep it, though she loudly complained that it smelled terrible and she would not keep it for long, so he had better hurry back. Meanwhile, a horse-drawn carriage creaked its way through a dark, creepy forest. The guards driving the carriage complained about how terrifying the forest was even in broad daylight, wondering why their branch had to be located in the middle of nowhere. The head guard called his partner an idiot, explaining that they had to stay hidden to avoid the Hunter Association since buying and selling slaves illegally was a major crime. They passed a massive sign warning them that they were inside a B-rank monster habitat, making the guards sweat as they realized a single high-tier monster attack would easily wipe them all out. The carriage finally came to a halt, and the guard opened the cage, shouting at the slaves to get out. A guard ran to report to their buyer, excitedly announcing that the new batch of slaves was in perfect shape and that the Manhwa Guild threw in an exceptionally big and sturdy one this time. A massive, disgustingly fat slave trader wearing furs and gold chains licked his lips greedily, expressing how much he looked forward to inspecting his new merchandise. The guards barked orders at the slaves to move, threatening to break the limbs of anyone who slacked off. They demanded the slaves be fed well, so they would not collapse at the auction, which led to Jin-gwon happily stuffing his face with giant roasted meat legs, looking completely clueless as he chewed. The guards then ordered them to wash their hair thoroughly, since greasy hair ruined a buyer's appetite, so they scrubbed Jin-gwon's hair with soap. They yelled that body odor was even worse and threw a massive bucket of water over him. After getting 10 years of mountain dirt blasted off his body, the direct air looked absolutely majestic, buff, and handsome. He happily relaxed inside a steaming hot wooden bathtub, smiling and thinking that living as a slave was actually not half bad. Sip Japsu, the old merchant who was now working as a bathhouse attendant, walked up with a towel and asked why on earth a slave about to be sold was smiling so happily. Jin-gwon turned around in shock, recognizing the old man and asking if this was what people called fate. He asked if the old man was a peddler, wondering just how many side hustles he actually had. Sip Japsu handed him a towel, explaining that peddling was just one of his many jobs and that they called him Sip Japsu because he always worked over 10 different odd jobs. The protagonist introduced himself as Jin-gwon, and the old man sighed, stating it was a massive shame. The young warrior shrugged, pointing out that he got washed, fed, and pampered, so the place did not seem bad. Sip Japsu warned him grimly that once the bath was over, a brutal branding ceremony awaited him. Suddenly, a giant boot stepped into the room, and a scarred guard yelled, demanding to know why they had not branded the new slave yet. He spotted Jin-gwon casually putting his tattered clothes back on and screamed at him to stop. The protagonist smiled warmly, politely stating that he was going to pass on the branding since his body was a precious gift from his parents, and he could not allow any harm to come to it. The guard was completely dumbfounded, looking down to find that the heavy iron shackles on Jin-gwon's hands and feet were already shattered into pieces on the floor. Furious, the guard grabbed his shoulder, telling him to stop talking nonsense and sit down. The warrior casually walked forward, effortlessly spinning the guard around with a gentle shrug of his shoulder. He strolled out of the bathhouse while dragging 5 guards who were desperately clinging to his waist like a human train. The guards screamed in sheer panic, and the head guard lost his mind, screaming for everyone to catch him. Jin-gwon admired the massive, high-class palace hallway, wondering how to get out. He spotted 2 maidservants who washed his hair earlier and politely asked for directions. The maidservant stuttered that she knew the way, and the rookie smiled, suggesting they walk together. She sweat-dropped, pointing at his waist and asking if that was not incredibly heavy. Jin-gwon tilted his head in confusion, completely oblivious to the 5 guards still desperately dragging behind him on the floor like dead weight. The maid decided not to ask questions and led him to the main entrance. Jin-gwon admired the massive gate, but the fat slave trader suddenly blocked their path with a squad of armed guards, laughing mockingly and bragging that a pro-slave trader always anticipated escape attempts. He proudly announced that he hired a legendary C-rank hunter to handle him, and a cocky swordsman wearing a cowboy hat stepped forward, tipping his hat with a smirk. The hunter, Lord Myong-chung of the Seol clan, began an incredibly long, dramatic monologue boasting about how B-rank achievements were inadequate for a genius of his stature who held a brush since birth. But before the arrogant fraud could even finish his epic monologue, a massive, bloody claw swiped down, instantly squishing his head into paste. The slave trader gasped in absolute horror as a colossal, glowing-eyed bear monster emerged from the forest. The giant beast, a B-rank monster known as the mountain bear, let out a deafening roar. The slave trader and his guards completely lost their minds, screaming for their lives as they realized the beast easily vaporized a C-rank hunter in a single hit. While everyone ran away in sheer panic, the young warrior stood there calmly, observing that the monster was built rather bizarrely. The bear reared back to crush him, but the martial artist completely ignored the beast, casually wondering if Alice was taking good care of his book as he readied his fist. With a massive shockwave, the scene transitioned to the sparkling modern city at night. Alice walked down the neon-lit streets, looking downcast as she realized she promised to bring back her sister's medicine today, but failed. Suddenly, a voice whispered right behind her, and she spun around in terror to find Jin-gwon casually crouching on top of a street booth. He grinned, asking if she kept his book safe, and Alice screamed in shock, asking why he always appeared from above and how on earth he escaped. Flashback showed the giant mountain bear lying completely knocked out on the ground, and the protagonist smiled blankly, claiming the monsters simply let him go. Suddenly, a violent cough echoed from a nearby building, and Alice ran inside, kicking the door open to find her beautiful pink-haired sister, Yong So-hee, coughing up blood on her bed. Alice hugged her, begging her not to speak, while Jin-gwon awkwardly scratched his head, asking where his book was. Yong So-hee smiled warmly, introducing herself as Alice's older sister and apologizing for her poor health. But right as she spoke, the apprentice noticed a powerful, terrifying, dark aura swirling around her body. He realized it was a highly foreign and unpleasant energy, completely different from normal martial arts. Alice covered her face, sobbing hysterically as she confessed to her sister that those bastards took everything, including the medicine money and the precious book she promised to protect. Those absolute bastards truly took it all. The memory of Alice getting absolutely clapped by the treacherous Maha Guild thugs weighed heavily on her mind. The giant masked thug Na Hande stood over her on the floor, coldly listing the costs of her previous medicine, claiming the interest was 1,300 gold plus 700 gold in processing fees. He threw a pathetic tiny pouch of coins onto the tiles, sneering that after deducting his cut, she was left with a measly 30 gold. Alice trembled in pure rage, calling him a cheap crook, and desperately asked if she could at least take her luggage. Na Hande mockingly asked why on earth the luggage belonged to her when its actual owner, Jin-gwon, was already in his hands. The other ugly thugs laughed boisterously, mocking her for being a total idiot, while Na Hande brutally kicked her in the gut, sending her flying across the floor. Coughing in sheer pain, Alice was left sobbing in the dirt, bitterly realizing that in this savage new world, the one who gets tricked is the ultimate idiot. Nahande loomed over her, telling her to get the hell out of his sight unless she wanted to sell her own body for a high price. Back in the present, Alice sobbed in her home, hugging her sick sister and apologizing for failing to get her things back. Jin-gwon stood watching the emotional scene, his expression turning incredibly serious as he stepped forward and placed a hand on Yong So-hai's shoulder. He looked at Alice, stating that even if this was a world where the tricked ones were called idiots, she needed to learn that there was always a heavy price to pay for deceiving others. With a confident grin and a flashy movement, the apprentice scooped both sisters into his arms, telling them to behave themselves from now on. Yong So-hai blushed furiously, sweating as she nervously asked what his relationship with her sister was. The warrior placed her gently back on her bed, smiling as he admitted they had a bit of history and that he was partly responsible for Alice failing to get the medicine. He clenched his fist, promising to go get the medicine with her sister. Yong So-hee smiled beautifully, asking if she could entrust her sister to him. The direct heir agreed, touching her cheek and playfully making her promise to stay strong and not lose to her illness before he returned. Yong So-hye blushed even harder, and Jin-gwon turned around, telling Alice it was time to go get back her money and his precious book. Alice followed him into the night, asking if they were going back to the same building where the thugs captured him earlier. Alice led the long-haired beast down a dark alleyway to a security door, explaining that this was the secret backdoor to the real headquarters. She revealed that the Manhwa Guild pretended to be a normal guild during the day, but at night, they ran the most famous illegal gambling ring in the black market. They looked down from a balcony inside a massive red-lit underground casino packed with noisy gamblers. Alice handed him a dark hooded cloak, explaining that since they were sneaking in, they should at least cover their faces. Jin-gwon put it on, and Alice pointed down to the arena, explaining that the most famous game in the entire place was a slap fight. The protagonist's sweat dropped, asking if they literally gambled by slapping each other's faces, and Alice confirmed that the entire black market casino ran on that single game. Suddenly, a voice cut in from behind, asking who they were. Our guy spun around to find Sip Chap-soo, but this time the old man was wearing a pink visor, a tight white t-shirt, a pink pleated miniskirt with his hairy legs fully exposed, and a beer-dispensing backpack. The old man ran over happily, claiming 3 coincidences made destiny, and offering them a beer. Alice made a face of pure, unadulterated disgust, muttering that if this was destiny, her life was seriously messed up. The martial artist was completely horrified, asking if there was no longer a line between men and women's fashion trends anymore. Jin-gwon quickly looked away in embarrassment, thinking that getting a normal job in this world was way too troublesome anyway. Sip Chap-soo giggled and pointed to the arena, explaining that 2 competitors stood across a table and took turns blasting each other with slaps. If the one who got hit stood their ground, it was their turn, but if they collapsed, they lost. The cultivator realized they bet money, and the winner took all. But Alice warned him to forget about joining since Na Hande was currently on a rampage. Na Hande blasted another challenger into oblivion with a massive slap, and the announcer screamed into his microphone, hyping up the champion for his absolute dominance. Na Hande laughed arrogantly, yelling for stronger bastards to step up and even offering to take their families, wives, or daughters as bets. Jin-gwon realized the boss of the Manhwa Guild had his book, but since he needed gold to enter, he turned to Alice to ask for a loan, though he quickly looked away in embarrassment. Smiling like a total demon, the cultivator placed a heavy, menacing hand on Sip Chap-soo's shoulder, asking the old man if he did not say they were fated. Sip Chap-soo sweated in terror, asking if he was aware he looked like a literal mugger. Jin-gwon's eyes gleamed with a scary red light as he mockingly asked if these did not look like the pitiful eyes of a junior asking for help. A moment later, our boy walked away happily tossing a giant sack of gold, while Alice patted Sip Japsu on the shoulder as the old man cried that he was simply sponsoring a junior with a bright future. Na Han-dae continued to brag, but Jin-gwon suddenly slammed the giant bag of gold onto the table, asking if he could join as long as he had cash. Dropping his hood, the challenger extended his hand, and Na Han-dae recognized him as the slave who supposedly got sold off. The rookie ignored the comment, asking if Na Han-dae was the one holding his book. The guild leader burst into a loud laugh, mocking the piece of trash for escaping and coming all this way, and Na Han-dae arrogantly told him to take the first hit, pointing to his own chin. The crowd of thugs laughed boisterously, mocking the scrawny slave for offering up his body to get sold again. Jin-gwon stood completely calm, thinking about how his overwhelming power could easily vaporize innocent people. He realized he needed a way to suppress and control his power, thinking that if a perfect fist multiplied his power, doing the absolute opposite would weaken it. Opening his hand wide, the martial artist swung his palm in a massive arc and unleashed a colossal slap. The shockwave was so immense that Na Han-dae got blasted face first into the concrete, shattering the floorboards and knocking him out instantly. The announcer and the crowd stood in absolute jaw-dropping horror. Alice screamed, asking if that was actually a slap, but the protagonist smiled calmly, claiming it was a new fist technique he developed called the Dispersed Great Chi Fist. He explained it was a style that finally broke down and released energy, but Alice and Sip Japsu screamed in unison that it was literally just a basic slap. Jin-gwon ignored their shouting and demanded the prize money, but the angry announcer and the remaining thugs drew their weapons, surrounding him and screaming for everyone to kill him. Grinning like a menace, the cultivator realized this was the perfect chance to practice. He swiped his palm, easily batting the thugs away and sending them crashing into the ceiling. Dusting off his shoulders, the warrior realized he was finally getting the hang of controlling his output. He asked Alice and Sip Japsu if they grabbed his luggage and the cash, and Alice frantically nodded, clutching the gold and realizing in pure shock that the crazy beggar actually escaped the slave traders by force. Grinning warmly, the cultivator told them it was time to go get the medicine. They soon arrived outside a massive, traditional multi-story medical clinic, and Alice cried tears of joy while Sip Japsu praised his righteous heart. Jin-gwon pushed the heavy doors open, but he suddenly froze, sweating as a foul, familiar stench crept through the air. He immediately remembered a traumatic childhood memory where his father Jin-moo sat inside a boiling purple cesspool of poison, laughing that a real man must endure it, only for the old man to violently vomit over the side of the tub a second later. Jin-gwon face-palmed, realizing his dad was a total fool, and Jin-moo explained that his nose was so sharp he could not stand the foul stench, which was why he failed to achieve a body impervious to poison. Returning to the present, Jin-gwon recognized that exact same unforgettable stench of poison arts. Suddenly, a shadowy, hooded figure stepped out of the purple mist, smiling sinisterly as he asked if they were here to buy medicine. The direct air glared through the darkness. Realizing they were dealing with the deadly poison arts, the shadowy healer wearing a dark, hooded robe continued speaking to them, explaining that lately, plague patients increased, which was why he was forced to treat them in the dead of night too. He gestured to the rows of jars and medicine bottles lining his shelves, warning them that while no one died yet, the plague already spread throughout the entire village. Alice gasps in utter shock, asking if that many people were actually infected. The doctor nodded, adjusting his sleeves, and sighed that it was still a major relief that a cure existed. He explained that the necessary ingredients like snow ginseng, blue-red snakes, and jade bee honey were incredibly hard to find these days, but the legendary elixir refined from these three ingredients was none other than the yin-yang pill. The healer smirks under his hood, boasting that in this new era of Murim, even without those supreme ingredients, it was a massive blessing that they could easily craft elixirs using skills. He revealed a handful of purple pills, handing the bag over to Jin-gwon and explaining that he added special herbs to restore his energy so he would feel better soon. Alice clasped her hands together with sparkles in her eyes, thanking the doctor from the bottom of her heart. She held the bag of medicine like a priceless treasure while the doctor waved his hand, telling her not to mention it, but warning her to keep taking the medicine until she fully recovered. Suddenly, a loud rustling noise echoed in the background as the long-haired beast began digging through the clinic's medicine cabinets. He made a total mess, pulling out drawers and tossing herbs around, prompting the doctor to sweat drop and ask if there was something else he needed. Alice screamed in pure embarrassment, asking our hero what on earth he was doing, but Jin-gwon just grinned innocently, claiming he was just looking around since there were a lot of interesting herbs in the shop. He held up a drawer with a giant smile, and Alice apologized to the doctor for his chaotic behavior. The healer waved it off, but his smile turned sinister as he announced some highly unfortunate news, claiming that the price of the medicine would be going up. Alice gasped in disbelief, and the fraud shrugged, claiming that demand skyrocketed lately and he could barely keep up with production. He bid them farewell, telling them to get home safely, and the two walked out into the cool night air. Walking under the crescent moon, Alice stared at her medicine pouch, thanking Jin-gwon for helping her get it, but she sighed that she originally expected their gold to last a whole month. She worriedly asked what they would do next week, but the cultivator silently looked at her before suddenly snatching the pouch of pills straight out of her hands. Alice shrieked in shock, asking what he was doing, but Jin-gwon calmly stated that he needed to check something. He pulled out a purple pill and popped it straight into his mouth with a loud crunch, leaving Alice screaming in absolute panic. She lost her mind, yelling about how much that medicine cost, but the warrior casually munched away, shrugging that he was running extremely low on energy after helping her out. Alice slumped over in despair, muttering about what a colossal waste of gold it was, but the vengeful son laughed, telling her not to be so stingy. Meanwhile, Sip-Japsu watched them from the shadows, looking highly concerned. Later that night, the sick sister, Yong So-hee, popped one of the pills into her mouth, and she immediately glowed with a healthy pink light, a beautiful smile spreading across her face. Alice cried tears of joy, hugging her sister and thanking Jin-gwon from the bottom of her heart for agreeing to her selfish request. The sisters happily held hands, thanking him and Sip-Japsu, who smiled warmly nearby. The next morning, the sun rose beautifully over the clinic. Jin-gwon sat casually on the high-tiled roof, eating a delicious meat-filled rice ball. He chewed happily, thanking Sip-Japsu for the food and pointing out that the rice balls tasted way better with meat. Sip-Japsu stood on the ground looking up, asking our boy what on earth he was doing up there, and the apprentice grinned, stating the view made the food taste even better before asking how Alice was doing. Sip-Japsu smiled, answering that she was fast asleep since she had not slept properly in days. Jin-gwon leaped down from the high roof effortlessly, landing on his feet with a soft thud. Sip-Japsu watched him, narrowing his eyes as he observed that Jin-gwon was clearly a high-tier martial artist. The apprentice smiled, claiming he was hardly a martial artist, and Sip-Japsu sighed, stating he was just an old man who could not adapt to this new world, juggling 10 different jobs. But the old man's expression suddenly turned razor-sharp, leaning in to whisper that he saw him swap the medicine pouches earlier. Flashback showed the protagonist secretly hiding a different pouch behind his back while digging through the cabinets. Sip-Japsu smiled, calling him a sneaky thief, and asked how the medicine actually tasted when he tried it. Jin-gwon looked serious, holding up a pouch, and the old man asked if he was certain the medicine was a fake. The apprentice explained that while extreme poisons can sometimes combine to become medicine, this pill was different, acting only as a temporary pain reliever that was actually highly addictive. He revealed that he swapped it with a safe, restorative herb from the cabinets earlier because he knew it would destroy Alice if she realized the medicine she spent all her gold on was actually poison. Sip-Japsu smiled proudly, calling him a chivalrous hero for saving them from absolute despair. Jin-gwon smirked, telling the old man that he was the real chivalrous hero here. Sip-Japsu laughed, adjusting his visor, and admitted that as an old man he simply became extremely interested in him. Meanwhile, the night fell over the city once again, and two dark hooded cultists wearing wooden masks stood inside the clinic. The healer bowed politely, handing them a pouch of gold and stating it was this month's tribute. He nervously asked when his official registration with their organization would be processed, but the masked cultist coldly snapped that selling medicine must have made his tongue slick. He tossed the healer another dark pouch of ingredients, telling him to take this batch first, and the healer bowed in thanks. But as the cultists turned to leave, the healer noticed the weight was off and nervously pointed it out, only for the cultist to coldly respond that the count was not off at all. The masked figure explained that the distribution of mana stones across the organization recently decreased, meaning if the healer wanted his usual batch, he needed to prepare double the tribute. He warned the healer that he had to show real sincerity if he wanted them to pitch his membership to the higher-ups. The healer clenched his teeth in frustration but forced a fake smile, thanking him for the advice. The cultist then added that the slave market was recently attacked by someone, warning him to keep his mouth shut since it might be an attack on their organization, his red eye glowing menacingly through his mask. The healer bowed, wishing them a safe trip, but the moment they closed the door, he slammed the bag of ingredients onto the table in a total rage. He ground his teeth, screaming that after everything they took from him, they still demanded more, and swore to pay back the humiliation 100-fold once he joined their ranks. Suddenly, a voice cut through the darkness, apologizing for interrupting his unsightly behavior. The healer spun around in absolute shock to find Jin-gwon sitting casually on a high wooden stool, eating the poison berries out of his hand like candy. The apprentice smirked, mocking him for sneaking back to steal and eat medicine in the dead of night, and the healer coldly warned him that taking medicine recklessly could easily turn into deadly poison. The cultivator grinned, stating his stomach was strong, and the healer's face twisted into a dark grin, claiming he did not care as long as the boy paid for what he ate. But the martial artist hopped down, smirking that this time the doctor was the one who needed to pay up because he brought a highly effective medicine just for him. He stepped forward with a terrifying fanged smile, declaring that for a fraud con artist like him, the most effective medicine was a brutal beating. The healer's eyes glowed with a deadly purple aura, and he smirks, claiming that sometimes turning a blind eye was the best medicine if he wanted to save his life. With a swift movement, the fraud unleashed his apothecary skill, launching a deadly flurry of poison needles. The needles zoomed forward with insane speed, but the rookie casually stood his ground. The healer boasted that his needles would not stop until they hit their target, but with a blinding flash of speed, the young warrior swiped his hand through the air, catching all the needles in his bare hand. The healer gasped in sheer horror, and in a split second, Jin-gwon blurred forward, appearing right in front of him. He swung his palm in a massive arc and delivered a colossal slap, creating a giant shockwave that sent the healer flying backward into the wall. The healer crashed hard, coughing up spit and shivering as he wondered what on earth just hit him, and how such a powerful fighter existed in this backwater village. The vengeful son walked up, asking why he used needles meant for saving lives just to kill, realizing that while the energy behind the doctor's attack was weak, the skill was quite a neat trick. He smiled with a fanged grin, telling the doctor he needed to be taught some manners, and the healer stood up, asking which organization he belonged to. Jin-gwon told him to pick a tone and drop the formal speech, and the doctor smirked, thinking the boy was an assassin class due to his swift movements and lack of presence. Noting the boy had no weapons, the healer asked if he was a pugilist, and the apprentice grinned, introducing himself as Jin-gwon. The doctor realized the boy was at least a B-rank fighter, but he charged up a massive ball of purple poison magic, boasting that against a pugilist, he held the absolute advantage. He unleashed his poison blood torrent, flooding the room with a thick, suffocating cloud of purple poison gas. Jin-gwon stood inside the cloud, muttering that it smelled like pure sewage, but he suddenly started coughing violently, covering his face. The healer laughed triumphantly, boasting that a pugilist's strength relied entirely on their breathing, meaning a blinded and suffocating fighter was nothing more than a durable scarecrow. He leaped into the air, charging his fist with purple magic and launching his new poison vortex skill straight at him. But standing in the middle of the raging storm, the long-haired beast grinned, letting a single drop of poison drip harmlessly off his finger. He looked at the shocked healer, stating it was only fair to return what he received, and smiled fiercely as he prepared to show off the brand-new broken fist technique he just developed. The battle inside the Misty Clinic reached its absolute climax as the fraud healer, Baekmundo, coughed up spit and screamed in pure agony from his chest being poked. The vengeful son casually sniffed the air, muttering that the disgusting smell of the poison arts was absolutely vile and was making him sick. The healer retreated in panic, staring at his chest and wondering what kind of crazy pugilist skill used fingers. Desperate to recover, Baekmundo activated his green recovery magic, his apothecary skill, first aid, to maximize the efficacy of his medicine and heal his wounds. The green light patched up his chest, but the healer stood there completely dumbfounded. The martial artist smiled smugly, explaining that this was not some basic system skill, but an ultimate technique he personally created. He dramatically raised his middle finger to show it off, explaining that the style used his fingers as a fist. The long-haired beast gave a flashy, fanged smirk, proudly naming his style the finger fist. Baekmundo got absolutely triggered by this explanation, charging a dark purple magical aura around his hands. He screamed that Jin-gwon was talking complete nonsense, claiming he had never heard of a technique that sounded like it was straight out of a comic book. He launched a vicious, claw-like strike, but the cultivator casually stepped inside his guard and intercepted his arm with a gentle two-finger poke. The strike landed with a soft pop, and the apprentice calmly pointed out that he already told him his finger fist was not a system skill. The doctor screamed in absolute agony, dropping to his knees while clutching his arm as the long-haired beast proudly repeated his technique's name. Baekmundo shivered, sweating, and trying to argue that he had never heard of such a skill, but he got cut off instantly. The rookie blurred forward and poked him directly in the chest, making him cough up a massive scream. Jin-gwon stood back with a massive smile, posing with his 2 fingers again, while the defeated apothecary collapsed onto the wooden floor in silence. The healer sweated and glared up with pure rage, asking the cultivator how much longer he planned on mocking him. The protagonist looked down, mockingly stating that for someone so incredibly weak, the doctor's voice was loud enough to belong to a peak master, adding that peak masters possessed a way of subduing opponents with just their fingers. Baekmundo's eyes widened in sheer realization, suddenly realizing that this guy was not using basic skills but was actually utilizing acupoint striking. The doctor stood up, readying his defense, and yelled that he would not fall for a relic of the past. He reasoned that acupoint striking was completely useless if he protected his acupoints, preparing to launch a counterattack. But before he could even move, the apprentice blurred forward, poking him in the shoulder and declaring it was a finger fist to paralyze the upper body. The healer screamed, but Jin-gwon poked his wrist, declaring it was a finger fist to paralyze the wrist. He poked his elbow, declaring it was a finger fist to paralyze the elbow, and finally delivered a massive poke directly to his chest to teach him some manners. The martial artist screamed with a terrifyingly happy face, calling the final strike just a finger fist. The force of the final strike blasted Baekmundo backward, and an X-ray view showed his entire skeletal structure and ribcage cracking under the force of the poke. The healer screamed in absolute agony and collapsed on his hands and knees, shivering and groaning. Jin-gwon smiled proudly, looking down at his hand and noting that the old saying about making opponents unable to make a sound with fingers was absolutely right. The defeated doctor shivered on the floor, thinking that the fingers were not even the problem, and yelled that the crazy bastard was just stabbing him with pure brute force. The apprentice looked down, grinning sheepishly, and admitting that he simply decided to call his brute force a finger fist. He explained that during his endless mountain training, he made a promise to himself that he would not lose to people like him in anything, including martial arts, character, looks, and even rock, paper, scissors. Jin-gwon blushed in melancholy as he remembered his training. The healer's sweat dropped, wondering what was wrong with the guy all of a sudden, and the direct heir mockingly added that if the doctor wanted to beat his finger fist, he should have played rock. Our guy smiled, pointing out that if he played rock, he would have been hit by his 4 great fists anyway. Baekmundo was pushed to his absolute limit, asking how a mere martial artist dared to mock a B-rank hunter. He reached into his robe and pulled out a glowing purple potion bottle containing mana crystals, crushing it in his hand to absorb the power. Our boy's body got engulfed in a massive storm of dark purple magic as he screamed that he would show his true power, activating his apothecary special skill, Poison Blood Release. The power surged, far surpassing B rank and reaching the legendary A rank. Laughing maniacally with his fangs exposed, the healer unleashed a massive vortex of absolute poison power. The giant vortex of purple poison flooded the room, but the apprentice stood completely unfazed. Jin-gwon took a deep breath, extended his hand, and unleashed a blinding flash of white energy. The white light blasted straight through the purple vortex and Baekmundo's torso, leaving the healer completely dumbfounded. Baekmundo gasped in sheer terror, expecting his body to explode as his feet began to disintegrate, but he looked down at his stomach and realized he was not dead at all, as the energy passed straight through his flesh without harming him. The master of straight punches clenched his fist, and the doctor realized the martial artist stood right in front of him, casually stating that the healer startled him. The apothecary patted his stomach, sweating as he realized he survived, and the smiling protagonist asked if he wanted to try again. Jin-gwon pointed his fist, telling the doctor to let him know if he wanted to keep showing his true power, prompting Baekmundo to drop his head in absolute defeat. The healer fell to his knees, bowing in total submission and greeting him as his lord, introducing himself by his real name, Baekmundo. The cultivator tilted his head, completely confused about what a lord even was. The next morning, the sun rose beautifully over Alice's house, where Baekmundo was using his green healing magic to draw the dark purple poison out of Yang So-hai's mouth. He applied acupuncture, explaining that he successfully drew out the poison, and the martial artist pointed out that the entire plague was just some lousy poison the doctor spread. Baekmundo's sweat dropped, politely telling Yang So-hai that her energy was only slightly weakened and she would be fine. He held up a fresh medicine pill he just brewed, telling her she would feel better in no time. Sipjap-su watched them, asking if Baekmundo was actually an apothecary class. When the confused Jin-gwon asked what an apothecary was, The old man explained that when hunters awakened, they unlocked standard classes, but rare classes like apothecaries possessed advanced medicine and poison skills. Sip Jap Su added that because they were so few in number, apothecaries were extremely rare. Baekmundo smiled smugly, folding his hands and boasting that he was a highly rare and talented individual. Suddenly, Alice screamed bullshit, violently grabbing him by his hair and pulling his head back. She screamed in pure rage, calling him a criminal bastard who poisoned a whole village, asking what he had to be proud of. Baekmundo glared at her, asking what she was going to do about it. But the terrifying shadow of Jin-gwon loomed over them with a fanged smile, raising his fingers for another acupoint striking. The healer froze in absolute terror, muttering shit before immediately bowing at a perfect 90-degree angle to apologize. The rookie looked down, seriously asking why someone with such rare talent and skill would do something so terrible. Baekmundo looked down silently, before pulling out a tiny broken purple crystal fragment from his hand, explaining it was because of the mana stones. The martial artist asked if it was the same stone used in their fight, and the healer confirmed it was now completely broken. Sip Jap Su explained that mana stones replaced all energy sources since the gate conflict, allowing humanity to build massive skyscrapers. The old man added that all progress in the new Murim was built on mana stones, but hunters were obsessed with them because they allowed them to obtain power that transcended their rank. He explained that mana stones only formed in tiny amounts in areas with high mana density or from powerful monsters. Baekmundo explained that the Dark Organization offered them as a tribute on the black market, admitting that no hunter would refuse such an offer. Alice realized that all the gold they paid for medicine was actually sent as tribute, losing her temper and grabbing the healer's collar to demand her money back. Sip Jap Su held her back, and the doctor grumbled that looking for what was already gone was a fool's errand. Alice screamed, violently ripping a sparkly pearl necklace off Baekmundo's neck, making him cry out that it was his father's keepsake. The old man dragged the blushing Alice away, and Baekmundo grumbled that they should talk things out. He explained that it would be extremely hard to find the rest of the gold, because he already paid it all to his higher-ups. Jin-gwon's eyes narrowed, asking who these higher-ups were, and the doctor gulped, completely terrified by the warrior's cold gaze. The healer immediately agreed to guide them straight to the bastard's meeting place, explaining that his bosses acted tough only because they had the backing of the Red Blood Alliance. The apprentice's eyes widened, asking what the Red Blood Alliance was, and the doctor was completely dumbfounded, asking how on earth he did not know about them unless he lived in the mountains for 10 years. Baekmundo explained that they were the heroes of the new Murim, the legendary 4 heavenly kings, who ruled over the Guild of the Blood God. Behind the shadow of a colossal snake, the menacing face of the Blood God appeared, while the vengeful sun stared into the distance in absolute cold fury. The mysterious criminal syndicate known as the Mafia operated out of the shadows of Yeonmu, utilizing decentralized secret cells to hide their true identities. Their terrifying reputation did not just stem from major black market crimes like illegal mana stone trafficking, but because they were backed by the legendary Guild of the Blood God, one of the 4 heavenly kings who ruled over the Red Blood Alliance. The apprentice, Jin-gwon, listened to this explanation from the shivering doctor, whose sweat dropped, and asked if the warriors seriously did not know about the Red Blood Alliance. Baekmundo explained that while the alliance's backing was technically just a rumor, the Mafia could never have established themselves so deeply without a colossal power supporting them. The cultivator's eyes narrowed as he quietly muttered that he understood. Suddenly, a massive, burning red aura of pure murderous intent flared up around the martial artist, casting a terrifying shadow over the room. Baekmundo shivered in absolute terror, asking what kind of ominous energy was choking the air, while Alice and Sip Jap Su stood nearby, sweating profusely, realizing the apprentice was releasing pure killing intent. The long-haired beast stared into the distance, his eyes flashing as he recalled his father's final, unforgettable lesson. In a flashback, the smiling Jin-mu explained to his young son that the power of his fist was never meant to harm others, nor was it meant for petty revenge. The father taught him that what truly mattered was a strong sense of responsibility so that he would never be consumed by his own monstrous strength. Clenching his fist in the present, the vengeful son thought about how his father's teachings were still the hardest to grasp, but he smiled a fierce fanged grin, realizing he now had another perfect reason to settle this. He turned around, ordering the doctor to lead the way to the meeting place, and the terrified healer bowed, stuttering that he would obey. Inside the clinic the next morning, the martial artist casually sipped his tea and asked if the meeting place was actually this apothecary. Mundo explained that the mafia visited the clinic at dawn on every full moon to collect tribute, and Jin-gwon nodded in understanding. Alice got highly annoyed, slamming her fist on the table and yelling if she was the only one who did not get what was going on. She demanded to know why they were suddenly acting so friendly, and why the doctor was calling him Lord. The direct heir's sweat dropped, looking blankly, as he admitted he did not know either, and told her to drop the Lord stuff since his name was simply Jin-gwon. The healer bowed politely in the corner, trying to ease the hostility by claiming they were all in the same boat now. The rookie asked if there was any other info, and Mundo explained that while he did not know the mafia's true identities, they were furious during the last tribute day because some crazy bastard ruined a slave market under their control. The doctor sneered that whoever did it would not be sleeping easy, and the protagonist smirks, jokingly stating that it seemed there was another chivalrous hero like him in town. Alice stood nearby, giving him a flat, deadpan look since she knew he was the literal culprit. The healer pointed to a massive organizational chart, explaining that since so many people were desperate for mana stones, all the minor subordinate gangs would be moving to get on the mafia's good side. Alice looked at him worriedly, asking if he was seriously planning to fight the entire mafia syndicate. She asked why he would even risk his life, and the warrior looked bored, calmly stating that seeing a bunch of weaklings run amok in his hometown was just incredibly annoying. Alice's sweat dropped, completely dumbfounded that such a petty annoyance was his actual reason for starting a war. The protagonist stood up, asking Sip Japsu if he knew anything, and the old man crossed his arms, explaining that while he did not know the mafia's true identity, he had a rough idea of where to sniff them out since big money always followed dark places. The direct heir grinned, jokingly stating that this humble junior would hire the old man for free, and Sip Japsu's sweat dropped, sighing that the kid truly had no conscience. The martial artist turned to Mundo, calling him druggy, and ordering him to go get some clothes that matched the mafia's standard uniforms. The doctor snapped that his name was Mundu, but the long-haired beast ignored him, telling Alice to take the druggie, help treat the sick, and keep a close eye on him. Alice bowed, agreeing to his plan, while the doctor sweated and asked what the clothes were actually for. Sometime later, inside a rival syndicate's massive wooden pagoda, 3 black market thugs bowed respectfully to a dark, hooded figure wearing a wooden mask. The thug leader's sweat dropped, stating they already paid this month's tribute and nervously asking what brought him here. The cloaked figure stood in silence, and the thug leader asked if the mafia representative actually knew who he was. Flashback showed Mundo panicking earlier, warning Jin-gwon that the mafia operated in completely decentralized secret cells and that they had no idea who was connected to whom. The vengeful son explained that was exactly why he wanted to see for himself. Back in the present, the thug leader sweated, pointing out that the representative just visited 2 days ago and suggesting he needed to send word inside first. Suddenly, the hooded figure's eye flashed red through the mask, and the master of straight punches thought to himself that if you block up the rat holes, the hidden rats eventually have to show themselves. He clenched his colossal fist and unleashed a single, god-tier straight punch. The entire traditional pagoda building violently exploded, shattering into wooden debris and smoke as nearby citizens ran in panic. The townsfolk gasped in awe, pointing at the ruins of the crooked loan shark guild and wondering if the majestic hooded figure walking out of the smoke was the one who did it. Sip Japsu watched him from the side, completely flabbergasted and thinking that possessing such absolute power at barely 20 years of age was truly mind-blowing. The old man realized the boy's strength did not come from system skills, but from pure traditional martial arts, marveling that such an unprecedented young hero appeared in an era where martial arts were completely looked down upon. Jin-gwon walked forward, stepping over the rubble and calmly stating that they were moving to the next spot. Sip Japsu followed behind, warning him that the power and value of mana stones were immense, which was why the Hunter Association managed them with extreme care. The old man pointed out that if the Red Blood Alliance was truly behind the mafia, this would not end as a simple crime syndicate's doing, since the world's peace was maintained solely by the treaty between the Hunter Association and the 4 Heavenly Kings. Jin-gwon adjusted his wooden mask, stating they would find out the truth once they checked. They arrived outside another massive black market stronghold, and the guards turned around in shock. Suddenly, the long-haired beast loomed over them with a sinister fanged grin under his mask, playfully asking them to solve a quiz of who he was. The guard's sweat dropped in terror, stammering if he was one of the mafia, and Jin-gwon's hand glowed as he laughed that they were correct before vaporizing the entire building. A montage of massive explosions blasted across the city as the Thief Guild, The black marketers and the human traffickers got absolutely obliterated in the blink of an eye. Down on the city's streets, the citizens gossiped happily, praising the nameless wanderer for cleaning up the town and calling the faceless hero the true savior of their time. Meanwhile, inside the real mafia headquarters, a group of high-ranking hooded figures sat around a long table in absolute fury. The boss coldly announced that 80% of their southern branches and 70% of their northern branches were completely wiped out. The cool-looking A-rank hunter Sion Wutan, who was ranked second in the mafia, crossed his arms and growled that they definitely had a rat inside who leaked their uniforms and locations. A beautiful, purple-haired female hunter giggled, mockingly asking if calling it a rat was a stretch, and suggesting that since Sion Wutan managed those branches, his own leadership was simply lacking. Sion Wutan slammed his fist on the table, telling her to shut her mouth, but the grand leader at the head of the table raised his hand and silenced them. The boss coldly pointed out that they were useless fools who did not even know what the target looked like or what skills he used. The beautiful female hunter Nan Hyang bowed politely, asking to take on the mission and giggling that she would be far more efficient than a certain someone. Sion Wutan glared at her in rage, but the leader agreed to let Nan Hyang handle it, clenching his scarred fist and ordering her to bring the target back barely breathing so he could take his head personally. Outside, the sun set beautifully as the protagonist walked with the doctor, smiling as he noted that the mafia was probably itching to kill him since the beaten ones were always the angrier ones. Baekmundo's sweat dropped, asking if it was safe to cause such a massive ruckus, pointing out that dozens of B ranks gathered together could easily match an A rank. The direct heir waved his hand, casually laughing that even if hundreds of ants gathered, they were completely useless before a tiger. The doctor stood there speechless, thinking the kid was completely insane for comparing B-rank hunters to ants, and wondering if he thought he was one of the 4 heavenly kings. He asked why they returned to the Maha Guild headquarters, and the apprentice tilted his head, asking if the doctor was implying the guild hall was too lowly for them. Inside, the giant Na Hande stood flexing his massive muscles while his thugs cheered that the day of revenge arrived. The guild leader ground his teeth, growling that the cheek Jin-gwon slapped finally stopped swelling and swearing he would not be fooled twice. His thugs hyped him up, claiming the beggar stood no chance against his cheat arm-raising skill. Suddenly, the doors opened and Jin-gwon walked in, looking completely bored. The thugs shrieked in absolute terror, and Na Hande's face turned red as he roared, calling him a filthy beggar. The giant swung a massive punch at his face, but right before the strike landed, the master of straight punches casually raised his hand and caught the giant fist with a soft pop. Na Hande froze in absolute horror, and Jin-gwon gently patted him on the head like a dog. The apprentice smiled warmly, holding his hands together and explaining that manners beaten into someone were never forgotten, suggesting this should be their new official greeting. Nahandai stood there sweating and shaking, and the young warrior casually strolled past him, plopping down onto the guildmaster's wooden throne. Resting his chin on his hand like an absolute boss, the long-haired beast grinned fiercely, his fangs flashing in the light as he ordered them to spread the word immediately that, as of today, the nameless wanderer officially took over their guild. Na Hande stood frozen, staring at his new master in sheer disbelief. The newly established master of the guild rested his chin on his hand, leaving Na Hande completely frozen in sheer disbelief. The giant sweat dropped, nervously asking if he heard him right, but Jin-gwon calmly walked past him, stating that his ears were working perfectly. He smiled with a slight blush, explaining that the takeover was all going to a good cause, so the giant should not feel too bad about it. He lectured the thug, pointing out that if someone spent their entire life doing dirty deeds behind closed doors, they could barely be considered human, adding that at the very least, they should not bring shame to the parents who raised them. Nahande's sweat dropped alongside Baekmundo, and the cultivator curiously asked if both of the giant's parents were still alive. Nahande got absolutely triggered by this question, roaring that his guild was built on his own blood, sweat, and dirty deeds, and screamed that he would never allow a dirty beggar to just steal it. He lunged forward to punch, screaming that both his parents were alive and well. The master of straight punches instantly blurred forward, delivering a brutal slap that sent Nahande flying across the room. He yelled that if his parents were alive, he definitely should not be living like a criminal bastard, before turning to the other thugs to ask if anyone else wanted to complain. The remaining thugs instantly dropped to their knees, trembling and shaking in pure terror, while the doctor's sweat dropped, muttering that the warrior was a total thug. A moment later, Na Handai was reduced to sweeping the floor of his own ruined guild hall, looking deeply humiliated. He grumbled to himself, swearing to pay the kid back. But Jin-gwon interrupted his thoughts, telling him to sweep more quietly since the grating sound of the broom was bothering his troubled mind. Nahande bowed in panic, agreeing to sweep quietly while wondering if the devil could actually read his mind. The fallen boss sighed, wondering how a B-rank hunter ended up as a maid, recalling that in the new Murim, rank was the absolute measure of strength. He remembered that starting from B rank, a hunter was considered truly strong and received elite treatment, believing he could live like a king forever in this remote town. He swore he would not fall like this, but the apprentice yelled at him to sweep every nook and cranny properly, asking if he was slacking off just because it was no longer his guild. Nahande's face twitched, cursing the filthy beggar under his breath. Baek Mundo walked up, smiling and praising the cultivator for taking over a back alley guild in an instant, and Jin-gwon asked if he completed his task. The doctor confirmed that just as ordered, the rumor of the nameless wanderer taking over the Maha guild was spread all over town. Posters lined the walls, attracting crowds of gossiping townsfolk, and the healer smirked that the rumor spread incredibly fast due to his massive popularity, meaning it definitely reached the mafia's ears. He asked if the mafia would actually show up based on a rumor, and Jin-gwon confidently stated they might even show up today. Sip Japsu watched him, pointing out that his leg was shaking and asking how he expected to survive with so little patience, suggesting he was actually the nervous one. Suddenly, our hero gasped, throwing the doors open with a massive smile and yelling for them to hurry up. But a beautiful, feminine voice giggled from the doorway, teasingly calling him a lovely person and addressing him as Gaga. 3 gorgeous Giseng girls carrying flowers stepped inside, asking if he was the nameless wanderer. The direct heir was completely starstruck, his eyes wide as he blushed and confirmed his identity. The gorgeous Giseng, Hua Ryong, held up a pink letter sealed with a lipstick kiss, explaining they prepared a special banquet for the hero of Yeonmu and inviting him to the Ink Fragrance Pavilion. The apprentice sat on his chair clutch holding the letter, looking like a total spellbound simp, which made the annoyed Alice grumble that he was completely bewitched. Sip Japsu rubbed his chin, noting it was a massive shock to the boy's system, and the blushing warrior asked if they all knew what the pavilion was. Alice deadpanned, stating he was the only person in town who did not know about the famous Giseng house. Sip Japsu explained it was the sun that rises at night, famous beyond Guizhou, but Alice warned him that where there was bright light, there were also deep shadows, claiming the place was full of dark rumors. Jin-gwon's face turned bright red as he grinned like a total pervert, claiming it sounded like a place that tested a man's competitive spirit, prompting Alice to look at his honest face in pure disgust. The long-haired beast stood up, declaring they should go see for themselves. That night, inside the luxurious red-lit Ink Fragrance Pavilion, Seonwoo Tan, the mafia's rank 2 A-rank hunter, walked down the hall to meet the pavilion lord, Nan Hyang, who was rank 3. Nan Hyang mocked him from her throne, asking what brought a busy man to her room, and Seonwoo Tan sneered, asking why he would ever visit a poisonous creature like her, demanding a table to drink. Nan Hyang ordered her guards to prepare a VIP table, realizing he sniffed something out, while Seonwoo Tan grumbled that she should have done that from the start. Nan Hyang smiled mockingly as he left, thinking his arrogant attitude ended today. She recalled that the boss put a mid-grade mana stone bounty on the nameless wanderer, realizing she would become stronger than Seonwoo Tan once she claimed it. She whispered to her guard to mix potent anesthetic powder into the VIP room's alcohol, and the guard gasped, pointing out a pinch could knock out an elephant. Nan Hyang smiled evilly, ordering him to put in at least 10 packets so the monster would actually fall, refusing to let Seonwoo Tan steal her credit. Meanwhile, Seonwoo Tan walked away growling, swearing to swallow both the mana stones and the nameless wanderer whole. Cut to a giant chicken leg being swallowed whole by the protagonist, who was happily stuffing his face with 2 drumsticks at once. Alice sighed, telling him to slow down and asking if he had been starving for days. Jin-gwon mumbled that he only ate rice balls lately, so he could not stop now. Na Hande sat next to them, bowing and thanking his new master for treating him like royalty on the top floor of the pavilion. The direct heir chewed happily, telling him to stop thanking him and eat more since the food literally melted in his mouth. Alice reached out her hand, blushing as she told him to eat slowly so he would not choke. But the gorgeous Hua Ryong suddenly ran into the room, hugging the warrior tightly from behind and pressing her chest against his back. Alice's jaw dropped in absolute shock, dropping her chopsticks. Hua Ryong cooed that she was waiting for him, explaining they closed the top floor to all other guests just for him, and held his hand gently, calling him Gaga. She looked at him with sparkling eyes, asking if he was curious about the special table she prepared, which made Alice grind her teeth in pure jealousy at the sly wench. Alice grumbled that Jin-gwon would never fall for such obvious flirting, but she looked over to find him with a massive, blushing pervert face, smiling like a total idiot and admitting he was highly curious. Alice face-palmed in defeat, muttering that he was an easy target, and tried to stop him, but she suddenly stumbled, clutching her spinning head in confusion. Inside the private VIP room, Hua Rayong sat with the dazed warrior, whispering that the room was so quiet that no one would ever know what happened inside. Jin-gwon smiled dazed, and Hua Rayong smiled evilly, thinking that no matter how much of a hero he was still just an easily manipulated man. She poured him a cup of small redbud, boasting it was a premium liquor, while internally laughing that the drink was laced with 10 packets of anesthetic powder designed to put an A-rank monster to sleep. Jin-gwon gulped down the cup, but instead of falling asleep, his eyes widened as he happily praised the delicious taste. Hua Rayong was completely paralyzed with shock, her mouth open in horror as the apprentice slammed the cup down and demanded another. She shivered, pouring the drink with a sweating forehead and hoping the next dose would work. But Jin-gwon gulped it down and pointed out that the liquor tasted different this time. He looked at her with a menacing, fully conscious, fanged smirk, mockingly stating that their dear Hua Rayong went through so much trouble spiking his drinks every single time. Hua Rayong's eyes widened in absolute paralyzing terror as she realized her cover was blown, and the cultivator grinned, asking if they should get a little more intimate. Suddenly, the long-haired beast grabbed her chin, tipped her head back, and violently poured the entire laced clay jug of alcohol straight down her throat, leaving her choking on her own deadly poison. The long-haired beast gripped the treacherous Giseng by her throat, asking if they should finally take things to the next level. He demanded to know who gave the orders to poison him and what kind of drug she used, pointing out they would easily find out once they fed the spiked liquor to Hua Rayong herself. The girl choked in pure agony, cursing him in her mind and screaming that she could not drink this specific drug. She instantly grew dizzy, realizing the master of straight punches already knew about her scheme, and collapsed unconscious onto the floor. Jin-gwon stood over her, grinning sheepishly as he realized that because she passed out so quickly, he would not even be able to ask what kind of drug it was. A moment later, Hua Rayong slowly groaned, her hand twitching as she woke up and wondered what happened. She sat up to find the apprentice sitting casually on a chair, sipping a drink with a fanged smirk as he asked if she was finally awake. Jin-gwon told her to sit down, calmly stating that her poison would not work on him anymore, so she should not try anything. Hua Rayong recalled the terrifying memory of being forced to drink her own poison, realizing the monster knew her plan from the start, but she quickly put on a smug grin to bluff. She stood up, boasting that she already poisoned his companions outside, and threatened that if he wanted them to live, he needed to cooperate. But before she could even finish her threat, the doors swung open and Baek Mundo walked in alongside Alice, happily announcing that the detoxification was complete. Alice groaned, holding her stomach, and the direct heir laughed, pointing out they handled the poison much better than he expected. Baek Mundo bowed politely, boasting that as a rare apothecary class in his right-hand man, a basic poison was completely out of his depth. He held up the confiscated bag of white anesthetic powder, laughing that the Giseng were completely out of their depth trying to use poison in front of him, and revealed he already subdued every last one of them. The three gorgeous Giseng girls from earlier were tied up with ropes on the floor, looking completely humiliated. The chibi-styled cultivator praised his work before turning back to the terrified Hua Rayong to demand she reveal where her mafia boss was located. Hua Rayong ground her teeth in rage, defiantly yelling that she would never betray her boss, but Jin-gwon's face turned dark as a menacing red aura flared up around him. He asked if she actually valued loyalty over her life, looming over her with an absolutely terrifying, demonic grin. Hua Rayong shivered, backing away in absolute panic and screaming if he would actually strike a beautiful woman. The martial artist continued to loom, raising his massive hand and coldly pointing out that when it came to loyalty, gender did not matter. The terrified girl waved her hands, screaming that she misspoke and babbled that a low-ranking member like her could never know the boss's actual location. The apprentice paused, his hand hovering as he asked what she meant, and Hua Rayong frantically explained that a special key was required. She revealed she heard the pavilion lord possessed a key that led straight to the mafia boss, but explained the main problem was that they needed two keys at the same time to use it. She explained that one key was kept by the pavilion lord, and the other was kept inside the VIP room with a magical skill placed on them so that taking one instantly alerted the other. Baekmundo realized that taking only one would allow the other keyholder to hide or flee, meaning they had to secure both keys simultaneously. Hua Ryong nodded in agreement, secretly laughing in her mind that the fools completely fell for her lie. She knew the Pavilion Lord was one of the strongest A-rank fighters in the entire area, meaning the arrogant country bumpkin was walking straight into a death trap. The rookie grins confidently, deciding they should split up, with himself going after the Pavilion Lord while the others search the VIP room, before ordering Sip Japsu to help Na Hande clean up the guild hall. Sip Japsu agreed, but Alice grabbed Jin-gwon's sleeve, nervously asking if they could truly trust a mafia member. The apprentice smiled warmly, stating a trap that did not kill him only made him stronger and told them to watch their own backs. The warrior walked away casually, and Alice sighed that he was a total monster anyway, while the treacherous Hwaryong sneered at his overbearing pride, thinking he had no idea how vast the world really was. She imagined her master, the A-rank Pavilion Lord Nan Hyang, crushing him, and laughed that a beast of a man was waiting to slaughter them in the VIP room. Meanwhile, Baekmundo crossed his arms, admitting to Alice that since the pavilion was a mafia den, the VIP room would be incredibly dangerous to handle. Suddenly, the direct heir turned back with a wicked, scheming grin, telling them not to worry because he just thought of an absolute god-tier plan. Baekmundo's sweat dropped, his face turning pale in terror as he got a terrible feeling from that mischievous face. Inside the Ink Fragrance Pavilion's luxurious VIP room, the mafia thugs were drinking around a table when a guard asked who called for Gising. A pair of beautiful legs stepped inside, and a sweet voice cooed that nobody had to call them because they came of their own accord. A gorgeous Gising with long, braided blue hair and a revealing dress smiled beautifully, introducing herself as Cho Ryong. The thugs blushed, completely starstruck by the disguised Alice and claiming they could not turn away such a beauty. A thug asked if only two of them arrived, and Alice smiled, introducing her very shy older sister named Nakhwa. Behind her, a tall, gray-haired Gisiang in a dress was trembling violently in pure embarrassment. It was the heavily make-upped Baekmundu, who was cursing the direct heir's terrible idea in his mind. The thug leader was completely hypnotized, blushing furiously and screaming that she was an absolute stunner who needed to be treated gently. The thugs laughed boisterously, raising their cups and claiming she was the finest beauty in the entire region. Baekmundo gritted his teeth, pouring a drink and thinking that, while he wanted to curse out his lord for the cross-dressing disguise, he had to admit the plan was brilliant. He observed that while the thugs acted loud and drunk, their movements were perfectly steady, and they showed no openings, realizing every single one of them was a dangerous B-rank hunter. He knew fighting them alone would have been suicide, and began searching for the key Hua Ryong mentioned was held by the red-haired man. Noting there was no red-haired thug in the room, he decided he needed to slip away to search other rooms and secretly charge the wine jug with his apothecary skill, Poison Enchant. But right as he was about to poison their drinks, a deep, powerful voice boomed from the doorway, asking what they were doing. The massive, shirtless Xian Wu-tan stood in the doorway, and the terrified healer froze in shock as the other thugs stood up to bow respectfully. Baekmundo noticed his reddish-brown hair, realizing he was the A-rank hunter holding the key. He recalled Jin-gwon's confident grin, telling them to handle the VIP room because it was easy, and wept in his mind that they were about to get themselves killed. The thug leader nervously offered Xian Wu-tan a fresh table of drinks, but the A-rank warrior declined, claiming Nan Hyang's cheap poison tricks meant she had something big planned tonight, and ordered the disguised doctor to pour him a drink. Baekmundo thanked his stealth medicine for concealing their presence from the hunter's mana scan, realizing they would be dead if it deactivated. He poured the poisoned wine, and Xian Wu-tan smiled fiercely, stating he was curious about Nan Hyang's scheme. But as Baekmundo handed him the cup, Xian Wu-tan's eyes narrowed, asking the disguised healer if he would know about the scheme. In a blur, Xian Wu-tan grabbed Baekmundo by the wrist and violently smashed the wine jug onto the floor. Alice screamed in panic, and the healer sweated in absolute terror as the A-rank hunter gripped his hand tightly, fiercely ordering him to reveal what kind of scheme he had, going so far as to disguise himself as a woman, just to get close to him.